today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about
why we sometimes sabotage our relationship even though we want to be more connected. Emotional disconnection can feel like an invisible wall. Understanding the science behind our emotions is going to help you to start to tear down those walls. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. I'm your host, Rich Heller, and today we're talking about your brain on disconnection, the science behind emotional distance, or I really should just call this why we sabotage our own marriages. Have you ever wondered why you feel like you're drifting apart even though nothing major seems wrong? Emotional disconnection can feel like an invisible wall, leaving you frustrated, lonely, and unsure how to fix things. You're trying to fix things, and the more you try, the worse it gets. Yes, folks, that's the feeling of self-sabotage. Understanding the science behind our emotions, behind this disconnection, is going to help you to start to tear down those walls. Because folks, it's an inside job. And when we understand how our own wiring is getting in the way, we can then start to turn that wiring in our own favor. And that's what this episode is going to cover. And let's start with the limbic system. Now, I don't want this to be like a big science-y episode. The limbic system is all about pain and pleasure. The limbic system is what drives emotional responses like anger, fear, and even maybe happiness to some extent, right? That's all chemical wiring. The limbic system is sort of this combination of your nervous system, your brain, of course, parts of your brain, amygdala and other parts of your brain, and also all the parts of your body that generate the chemistry of positive and negative emotion. That's the limbic system's all about that, right? And because we're very emotionally hooked people, emotions often bypass rational thinking. In fact, let's face it, right? If you are having very intimate, close experience with your partner that's joyful and loving and just feels all-encompassing, you don't want to be rational in that moment. You want to go with the flow. Well, we follow a similar philosophy when we're angry, but we may not want to follow that same philosophy when we're angry. We may want rational thought to step in. And so part of what this episode is going to cover is, when do we want to check out? When do we want to check in? When do we want to be reactive? And when do we want to be proactive? The center of the limbic system on the negative side is the part of our brain that's looking for danger all the time. This is the part of our brain when you're walking through the forest, it's a little wary. Or maybe it's 2:00 in the morning. I've been alone in my house the last couple of nights. And so just me and the dog. If it weren't for the dog, I don't know what I'd do, right? Because I figure he's listening when I'm asleep. I think that. Of course, he's probably out cold too. But sometimes I'll wake up hearing a noise and I'll wonder, what's that noise? What's going on? And that part of my brain that's looking for danger clicks on, and I'm very wide awake. And it turns out it's the dog. He's walking down the stairs. He's gone to go check something out and he's coming back. Or maybe it's a pipe, or maybe it's a car that went by and was particularly loud. There's a part of my brain that lights up anytime something possibly might appear threatening comes up. And then I find out that the thing was not threatening, but guess what? The chemistry is already happening and it's hard to go back to sleep. In our emotional lives, this happens all the time. In our emotional lives, we'll be talking to our partner and they'll say something and we go, oh, that was mean. And that part of our brain lights up and we go, and sometimes we respond with a mean reaction. Now on their side, they didn't intend it to be mean. It's like that car that went by. It didn't mean to disturb me. But because I have no way of explaining my experience that I judged as threatening, I react in a way that's mean, and they then have the same reaction. And so the parts of our brains that are determined whether we're going to fight, run away, or play dead get hyped up. We go from level 1, which is serenity, to level 3, which is we're on eggshells with each other. We're feeling like maybe we need to get our claws out. That's called an amygdala hijack. And most of us have become unconscious about this. We don't really notice it. A lot of times these things happen and we don't even notice it. I'll give you an example from my own life, very recent. I was in a movie theater yesterday watching Wicked, Part 1, 2.5 hours, folks. Really long movie. Part 2, going to be really long too. It was freezing cold. They had trouble with the heat. And I came out and made a comment. I said, girl, so it's a young lady. I said, girl, you got to fix the heat. And I thought I was being kind of cool and street when I did that. And she walked off. And then I went to the bathroom and I came out and I said to the guy behind the counter, wow, I guess the heat's broken. And he was all fired up with me. Right. And he very dismissive. And I said, hey, I feel like you're being a little dismissive with me. What's going on here? And he said, I'm not being dismissive. I told you the heat's going to be fixed. And then, my amygdala got triggered and I started leaning into him. And I noticed what was happening, though. So we're both a little fired up. He's not. He's just telling me how it is. And I'm just telling him how I feel. And I said, let's start over. All right, my rational mind kicked in. Let's start over. What's your name? And he gave me his name. And I said, my name is Rich Heller. And we shook hands. And he said, I'll tell you the truth. When you called her girl, that really pissed me off. I thought it was crass and rude. And I turned to her and I apologized to her. I said, listen, I really didn't mean to be crass or rude with you. I thought I was being kind of funny and street, and I'll be more careful in the future because we don't know each other. And I turned back to him and I said, you still seem a little fired up. He said, hey, the truth is I had surgery yesterday and I'm in a lot of pain. So the whole thing deflated, but it could have gone higher and higher. And in my marriage, right, I'm often not that careful. And I'm sure you're hearing this and you're going, oh, this has happened in my marriage all the time. I get it. Step on one toe, step on another toe, hit one, hit the other, pull out a baseball bat, pull out a rifle. Emotionally, I'm talking about. That's all amygdala. Now, what happened with me and this guy is my prefrontal cortex kicked in, right? I realized that he was responding emotionally to me in a way that I hadn't invited. And we weren't married, so we don't have a history. And so I went to diffuse it. My prefrontal cortex said, what are you going to do? Have a fight in the movie theater? No, that's not who you are. Your mission is to build relationships. And so my prefrontal cortex said, introduce yourself. My prefrontal cortex is the rational part of my brain. All right. So we've got this part of our brain that's looking for danger. It has no rational basis whatsoever. It's all emotional and reactive. Then there's the cerebral cortex or prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that's rational and makes decisions about what are we going to entertain? Are we going to entertain the amygdala or are we going to entertain something else? And so my prefrontal cortex directed me through my prefrontal cortex to tone things down, and it toned down. And now I'm praying for this guy because the surgery he went through was pretty personal and painful. I was really surprised he told me about it. The prefrontal cortex is the manager. It's the stage manager. All right. If this were a show, the prefrontal cortex is the stage manager. The amygdala is a very fiery diva that has to be noticed. And the prefrontal cortex decides when the diva is going to find expression and when it's not. That's how I want you to think about this. The prefrontal cortex, as the director, only has so much energy. It can only manage, even the best of directors can only manage so many things at once. So a lot of these emotional functions are happening automatically. The amygdala, the diva, is on automatic. The prefrontal cortex or director is directing the amygdala to limit the reaction at certain times and let it out at others. If I had went to this guy and said, wow, it was really cold in here. And he had said, yeah, you want to do something about it? And jumped out over the counter with a baseball bat. My prefrontal cortex probably would have said to my amygdala, all right, this is it. We're either going to fight or we're going to run, but you decide, right? At that point, the director allows the diva to jump in. Because he was sitting on the other side of the counter and he was expressing himself in civilized tones, the prefrontal cortex took control and said, hey, you know what, amygdala? We don't need you right now. That's how this works. But most of us have sort of allowed the limbic system, the part that just wants pleasure or the part that's reactive, to take over. And that is a driver of disconnection. Right. In the previous episode, we talked about distracting ourselves with games. We talked about distracting ourselves with work. We talked about distracting ourselves with our children. We talked about distracting ourselves with hobbies, personal interests. We talked about distracting ourselves with AI. Right. People do that now. Then we talked about all the ways we can do, and we do those things almost unthinkingly. You know, when people come to me, when we distract ourselves with an intimate relationship that wasn't part of our marriage contract, our intimate relationship with another person that our marriage contract said we weren't going to do, we don't sit there and make a decision, I am now going to break my marriage contract. It happens very unconsciously. We're dissatisfied in our relationship. There's no sense, a very minimal sense of connection. We're leading parallel lives. We meet someone at work. They flirt with us. They see our unhappiness. They want us to feel better. We appreciate the attention because we're not getting any at home. And we sort of slip down this slippery slope of, oh, this is pleasurable. I want more of this. And it's not, our prefrontal cortex has very little to do with those decisions. Our prefrontal cortex says stuff like this. This feels good. You know what? This isn't cheating. I can do this a little more. Our prefrontal cortex says, you know what? We're not kissing, so it's okay to flirt. Then when we're kissing, our prefrontal cortex says, well, you know what? We're not doing it, so it isn't actually sex. And then by the time we get to actually doing it, we go, she was a bitch bastard anyway. This is really good. I just won't tell them about it. You know, that way I can keep my family intact and do this also. It's a slippery slope where the prefrontal cortex allows the limbic system to take over. And what I'm telling you is, everybody's doing this. Not everybody's doing that, but everybody's on the slippery slope. And we've all set boundaries for ourselves at different points. And the question is, where are you on the slope? And how willing are you to take control of your own brain? All right, I want you to get that your brain is not who you are. Your brain is a tool. And when we're on that slippery slope of the limbic system, it's not that we are immoral people. Though that may be true, that's not what's going on. What's going on is we've decided that we're going to allow whatever part of our brain is active to continue to act, instead of making a decision that we are going to exercise the rational part of our brain. The rational part of our brain knows that when we're telling someone intimate secrets about our lives that should only be told to our partner, that's wrong. At least in a monogamous, committed relationship. The rational part of our brain knows that when we're laughing and flirting with someone, that's wrong because we're giving them the kind of attention we should be giving our partner. We're not giving it to our partner because we're mad at them. We're not giving it to our partner because they've hurt us. We're not giving it to our partner because we're leading parallel lives. We're not giving it to our partner because we're too busy running the business of our lives to actually give that to each other anymore. The rational part of our mind knows that. And when we exercise that part of our mind, it no longer works against us. And that's what this episode is about. I want you to get that your brain is like a group of muscles, and you've allowed your limbic system, like all of us, to make the decisions for you, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can make a decision that your rational mind is going to be in the driver's seat. And you can recognize when that muscle of rational mind is worn out, which happens, by the way. At the end of the day, it's worn out and tired. It's time to go to bed. Time to check out. At the end of the day, you can come home and say to your partner, you know what? I'm exhausted. I don't have the emotional energy to deal with X, Y, and Z. Could we talk about it tomorrow? But what we do instead is we go, I can handle anything. And then we allow our amygdala to handle X, Y, and Z, and it turns into a huge fight. And then when we're pissed off, we go off and we get some screen time and we develop some dopamine dependency. Dopamine is like what gives our brain pleasure. Basically, drugs are modeled to replace dopamine, and they do. Heroin will replace dopamine over time. So will opioids. So will anything in that realm. And so, maybe we're doing drugs, like maybe we're having a couple of drinks to give ourselves some pleasure. Maybe we're smoking a little something to give us some pleasure. Maybe we're watching something that's really, if you're watching something that's pornography or borders on pornography, that's going to stimulate dopamine. If you're buying, maybe you're shopping. Maybe you start your Christmas shopping in January. And a lot of it's for you. All right. That's a dopamine hit. There's all kinds of ways that we can, when we're run down, we can allow our limbic system to run wild. So I want you to revisit how are you using screens? How are you using your phone? How are you using these things? Are you using them to get closer to your family, or are you using them just primarily for that dopamine hit? And last of all, there's nothing wrong with a dopamine hit if you're conscious and intentional about it, right? Where we want to go is we want to go from being unconscious to, I don't feel so good. I think I'll go shopping, or I don't feel so good, and maybe I'll look at a naked girl, or I don't feel so good, maybe I'm going to play a game. Or we want to go from unconscious choices to, I'm tired. It's been a long day. I have done everything I'm supposed to. Now I can do something for myself. I'm going to give myself a little dopamine hit as a reward. Also, recognize how recurring conflicts reinforce neural pathways that make emotional withdrawal the default response. When in your relationship, things have gotten kind of negative, your limbic system wants to avoid negativity. It doesn't like it. Who does? So when you get into something that feels negative and it doesn't look like there's light at the end of the tunnel, or the light looks like a train, naturally you want to avoid it. And that becomes a recurring pattern. So you may be experiencing this every time your partner brings up something that's a little uncomfortable. You go, oh, whoa. I need to go do something now. All right. Just get that all of this neural pathways, the parts of our brain, it's part of our wiring, and changing it, you can't just make a decision. You can just make a decision to change it. But just like in New Year's, when you make a decision that you're going to become more fit, you don't just become more fit. You go to the gym. And the first time you go to the gym, you go, oh, this sucks, right? That's how it's going to be as you start using the different muscles in your brain. And there's all kinds of ways to use them. Another episode. But hint, prayer, mindfulness, meditation, great ways to build up your prefrontal cortex. In the beginning, you'll be lucky if you can pray there's a really short prayer that you can use, the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, usually everything outside of me, courage to change the things I can, usually what's within me, and the wisdom to know the difference. It may take you 2 weeks just to learn to use that prayer when you feel triggered. Using that prayer when you feel triggered. In the theater, if I hadn't done a lot of mental gym time already, I might have said to that guy behind the counter, hold on a second. And I might have said a quick serenity prayer to myself. It might take you a couple of weeks to get to the point where you can just learn to do that. And then eventually, when your prefrontal cortex gets strong enough, you can bypass the serenity prayer, because you can just start telling your amygdala, chill out, your diva, chill out. Something else is going to happen here. But you got to build up your prefrontal cortex to do that. And it takes regular practice to break those loops, to break the negative loops we've been allowing to happen, because we naturally want to go to what feels good and naturally want to avoid what feels bad. It takes a while to recognize what's triggering our reaction. Sometimes we have a reaction that's 0 to 60 instead of 0 to 10. Right? If I'm completely honest, I had a little overreaction to that guy behind the counter because I felt like I was being dismissed. And as you approach the age I am in life, people tend to be more dismissive of you, except when they're listening to your podcast, hopefully, fingers crossed. But like if you walk into a store, if I walk into a dance club, all right, which is filled with hot 20-year-olds, I'm not going to get a lot of attention. When I was a hot 20-year-old, I got a lot of attention, right? Not getting a lot of attention is a transition. It's something I'm working on. I'm accepting that, at this stage in my life, different things are going to happen, different expectations, different roles. In my weakness, another kind of strength is going to evolve. It takes some work. I've had to do some work to recognize that. What's the root of this? What is this need for attention? Where did it start? Where in my childhood did it develop? What do I need to let go of? What are the assumptions I've made about myself and the world that need to change and shift, that I need to release? There's a lot of work that goes into changing what's on the inside so that I don't go from 0 to 60. And the same is true for you. If you're being triggered and your partner's saying something to you and you're getting really angry or really afraid, something inside you from your past has got to shift and change. Being intentional is the whole game here. If you set an intention, you can expect that anything that is unlike that intention is going to come up. So do not think when you set an intention and you fail that something's happened that's bad. Instead, recognize that the intention is bringing up things that need to be healed, and you may need help with that. All right, I want you to feel free to reach out to me if this is going on for you. If you feel like you need some help with this, retraining our prefrontal cortex and our limbic system sometimes takes outside intervention, because we've had a very incestuous relationship with those parts of our brain. Very much like when you go to a gym, it really helps to have a personal trainer check in with you instead of just going, what do I do now? And making it up as you go along. When you go to a gym for the first time, the personal trainer, they do an assessment of what muscles are strong and what muscles are weak. They give you exercises to strengthen the weakened muscles. They give you, they say, oh my God, you're using this muscle the wrong way. They retrain you in some of the things that you've been doing so you're not hurting yourself. Well, when you're retraining your brain, it's very similar. If you haven't worked with your brain in this way before, you're going to want a personal trainer. So I'm saying go to richinrelationship.com, schedule a call with me, and let's talk about what are the parts of your brain that you want to develop. What are the intentions that you want to set? What's getting in the way? I will help you identify what the next steps are, because that's what that call's for. It's a free call. All right, so understanding your brain, the different parts of your brain, its role, the role of these parts in disconnection and in reconnection is the first step towards healing. And I want you to reflect on your triggers. I want you to reflect on the disconnects, reflect on the places where you're allowing your limbic system to suck you off into the world of mindless pleasure, except where you're allowing your limbic system to suck you off into the world of mindless warfare. And I want you to think about one small change that you can make to foster connection today. In the next episode, we're going to uncover how emotional disconnection often starts subtly. It's a slow drift, and what you can do to stop it before it goes too far. Again, go to richinrelationship.com, schedule a call with me, and there's also lots of tools and resources there. Have a wonderful day and an awesome tomorrow, and thank you for listening.